There was this man named Jonathan, and he said that when he was younger, he would go and visit his grandfather, who lived on the bayou in Louisiana. His grandfather had lived his whole life right on this haunted waterway. But we all know that if you throw a stick in Louisiana, you're going to land on some haunted, historical, urban legend, or some type of supernatural history. Now, he said this particular visit, he was really excited because he was going to stay for a week, and he hasn't seen his grandfather in a really, really long time. So he gets there, and his grandfather is really, really excited to see him, and he immediately, embraces him, and good to see you. And he's like, are you hungry? Let's go back and get some food. Normal grandparent stuff when you haven't seen them in a while. So when they walk back to the house and he gets inside, Jonathan said that the first thing that he notices is this really horrible, stench of something rotting. So he asks his grandfather, he's like, hey, Grandpa, what's that smell? It smells like something's rotting in here. And his grandfather just says, oh, it's nothing, don't worry about it, probably just a dead animal nearby, because they lived really way out on the bayou. So he doesn't think much of it, and he continues on into the house. And as he's walking to put his belongings away in the room that he's going to be staying in, he notices that one of the doors right next to his room is boarded up. It's got, boards and nails, and it's completely shut. So he asks his grandfather, he's like, hey, Grandpa, what's up with this? I don't remember this being like that. And his grandfather just says, oh, it's nothing. I'm just doing some repairs in the house. And the room that I'm doing that repair on, the window doesn't shut all the way. So, in case an animal gets in or whatever, this door is barricaded so nothing can get in. So he doesn't think much of it, and they continue on. At this point, they're eating dinner, and they're just talking. His grandfather's asking him about life and what's been going on. And Jonathan said that as soon as it got dark outside and nightfall came, his grandfather got really, really anxious and antsy. And he immediately was like, hey, I want you to go to your room, and I want you to lock the door and go to bed. And Jonathan's like, wait, Grandpa, it's still early. I thought we were going to stay up late and you were going to tell me stories. And his grandfather's like, he immediately shut it down. His grandfather's like, no, not at all. Listen, I really, really want you to go to bed. And like I said, lock the door. So Jonathan does what he's told. He goes to bed and he locks the door. Later on that night, shortly after he falls asleep, he hears this loud ruckus noise coming from outside the room that he's in. And he's just hearing it, and he hears the front door open, and it's just a lot of odd noises for that time of night. So he's listening, but again, his grandfather told him, lock the door, don't come out. And so before he knew it, Jonathan fell back asleep. The next morning, Jonathan's grandfather comes in, and he's like, hey, Grandpa, what was all that noise going on last night? He's like, I was hearing some strange things, and I just found it very odd because I thought you were asleep. And his grandfather's like, oh, it's nowhere, it's fine, it was nothing, everything's okay. And Jonathan's like, why were you so nervous last night at dinner when, we were eating and you had me, go to bed so suddenly? And he's like, oh, just precautionary, I just wanted you to get to bed early because we have a big day today. So he doesn't think anything of it again, and he just goes about his day. Jonathan said that every night following that night, he heard the same loud noise coming from right outside the room, and something was moving around. But he didn't think anything of it because his grandfather told him not to worry, so he didn't come out. But the one thing that Jonathan did notice was that his grandfather had recently installed a industrial grade deadbolt on his door that he was staying in. And he asked his grandfather about it, and he's like, is this new? I don't remember this being here last year when I came to visit. And he's like, oh, just precautionary, some animals get in. And his grandfather kept playing everything off, and he found that to be really, really weird. So the next night, the last night, he's in his room, and again, just like clockwork, same time, he hears the exact same ruckus noise coming from outside of his room. Only this night he's like, I'm going to take a peek, and I'm going to see what's going on. So he takes a peek, he looks outside the door, and through the crack he sees this middle-aged muscular man with the head of a wolf in the kitchen, moving around violently, and it's making these loud, violent gurgling sounds. And Jonathan says, he gasped, and before he knew it, this creature turned around and noticed him too. And the creature started to walk towards him. And Jonathan said that it closed the distance so fast he didn't even have any time to react. And before he knew it, this wolf-like creature was on top of him, and it grabbed both of his arms and it pinned it by his side. And Jonathan said the only thing he could do in that moment was to bite this thing on the upper arm. That was the only thing he could do. And this wolf creature let go for a split second and allowed Jonathan to run away and go back into his room and lock the door with that deadbolt. And Jonathan said, he sat in the corner and he hid, and he heard this thing moving around in the house for the remainder of the night. And Jonathan said, probably due to the adrenaline dump crashing, and, he ended up falling asleep. And the next day he wakes up, he's still okay, he's still alive, nothing got in through the door. And he said when he went out into the living room, he saw his grandfather coming in through the front door. And his grandfather looked like he had been through hell. He had no shirt on, his hair was all messed up, he looked completely disheveled. And Jonathan said that what he did notice was that his grandfather had a bandage on his upper arm. And it was in the exact same spot on the exact same arm that he bit this wolf-like creature the night before. And Jonathan couldn't help but think that it was his grandfather that was this wolf-like creature. And that explains all the weird behavior and the weird requests and the door being boarded up and everything that's been going on since he got there. And Jonathan to this day still believes that that creature was his grandfather. And if you know anything about the legend of the Rougarou in Louisiana, you would believe it too.